Welcome to That Anita Live, the talk show dedicated to providing emotional healing through sharing to help you create a happier life. Honey, this episode I am oh so happy. Why? Well, this is my second show with an in-studio audience.
Yay!
Hey, y'all.
Hey.
Today's guest is here to heal us with her story of bracing for divorce. She's going to give us 3 tips to help you brace for divorce. Things you should know, but may not realize you need to know. Welcome, Debbie, to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming out, Debbie.
My pleasure to be here.
Okay, I understand you're a divorcee.
I am.
Take me to the day, internally, where just you knew that this inevitably was going to be a divorce.
Well, let me back up just a little bit if I can.
Okay.
I'm actually a product of divorce. And when I talk about being a product of divorce, all of my parents have been married 3 times.
Whoa.
So I grew up as a child of divorce.
Okay.
As a teenager, my thought was, I'm never going to get married. I'm never going to have kids. I didn't want to have kids because I didn't want my kids to go through the emotional drama that I went through. So needless to say, the lesson learned here is never say never, because not only did I get married once and had 2 kids, I got married a second time and had 2 kids. I'm sorry, I didn't have 2 kids, but I got divorced as well. So I have experienced it as a child and I have experienced it as an adult. And so I have a lot of feelings about divorce both ways.
Okay, so that's the very interesting point. Let's take it then from the side of your childhood. And through a child's eyes, tell us what divorce looks like and how it feels. Like, how old were you the first time?
Well, first time I was 1, so I really didn't even know.
Okay.
My biological dad, I would see basically every 6 months or ish. From that perspective, my mom did a great job of remaining friends with my dad. So when my mom got married to the 3rd time, she actually had her wedding reception in my dad's backyard with his 3rd wife. So I grew up with everybody getting along, which is not always the case.
Right.
But it was a good thing. And I wished that I had that as an adult. I don't. It's something I strive for, but didn't work out. But that's one of my good memories of divorce as a child. My mom's second marriage ended because he had an affair. And he did a lot of nasty things that I didn't know he did. I didn't learn those until I became an adult. But what's interesting is I adored that man. And so when I think about all the horrible things he did from the divorce process, it kind of slanted how I felt about him in the later years a little bit. It's like, what? You let the house go into foreclosure? How could you have done that? You know, that's why we had to move when I was 13 and nobody talked about it, kind of thing. So lots of things happened along the way. As a teenager, I basically raised my sister because my mom was always working, so it was kind of a single family kind of house.
And what's the age difference between your sister and you?
6 years.
Wow.
So as a product of divorce, and I'm kind of going all over the place here, but painting a quick picture. As a product of divorce, there's actually 9 siblings. So I have, but none of them have the same mother and father, if that makes sense. So I would see different ones at different times, but through all the marriages, I consider them all my siblings.
I need a chart.
You know, I've had to go to therapy once because of my second divorce, and that was the thing that the therapist had me do, was to map out a chart. And every time I would bring up certain family members, she would go, now which column is this one in? But at least she could actually visualize it.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's really what it is. So raising my one sister, you know, through the teenage years, there were 6 years between us, and I was the mother. There was a lot of resentment that created a lot of different kinds of problems, but I was basically the mother.
Resentment for?
She didn't want me to be the mother. She, you know, she wanted her mother, but her mother was off working, you know, 12 hours a day trying to make ends meet, so it was very difficult. So one thing that one of my relatives said to me at one point in time was, I don't know how you do it, and I don't know how you turned out to be so responsible because of everything that I went through as a child. And I, you know, maybe I got in trouble once, never with the law or anything like that,
Right.
but I've always been a pretty good, pretty responsible person. So I remember as a teenager, I worked for my stepdad for almost 10 years. And I remember being in the bathroom many a times at his office thinking, I'm never getting married. I'm never getting married. I never want my kids to feel what I'm feeling right now. This is awful. And my kids went through the same thing I went through, if maybe even worse. So that's the growing up phase,
Yes.
if you will.
And what you took from that as a child was that you were never going to get married.
I was never going to get married.
Okay, so now how did it happen?
You know, we girls, you know, we watch all those movies and they say you're supposed to get married and you're supposed to live happily ever after.
Barbie and Ken,
Barbie and
Cinderella.
absolutely, all of that. And I fell into it, you know, it's like, and there was a lot of insecurities, which I think a lot of girls have.
Okay.
And I met a guy at 18 or 19, I think, and you know, he was really interested in me and we kind of got along and it's like, well, I guess this is it. And, you know, in my head, I'm going, well, I guess I should marry him because who else is going to want me?
Whoa.
And, you know, we dated for 5 years, lived together for a couple of years and finally got married. And I thought that's what you were supposed to do, you know. Again, I'm a completely different person today and I see the look on your face today. But I think there are a lot of young women who think that, you know, they don't think enough of themselves that the only next step is to go and get married, which is definitely not the case. I've actually tried to teach my boys, don't get married until you're at least 30. live it a little bit, you know.
Right. Find out who you are first.
That's what I instilled in them, is hopefully little lessons that I had learned. So I got married. 5 years later, we had our first child. And at that point, things were getting kind of rough. There's a lot of controlling going on, and being that independent person that I'd always been as a teenager, this controlling thing wasn't quite working really well for me. And got pregnant with my second child, more controlling going on. And I remember saying to my mom, you know, I can't do this. And for another 5 years, I stuck it out. So, and what's interesting, I would call my mother every day, I would cry, I would complain, and she's like, you know, Debbie, you don't want to put your kids through what you went through. You just don't want to do that. And she was right, I didn't. But then one day it got so bad, she's like, okay, it's time. And it was weird how I had to get my mother's permission to leave my husband, but it was that emotional, okay, it's okay to go now, you know. But she'd been there, she knew what I was about to go through and how difficult it was going to be. And it was, it absolutely was. I remember not wanting anybody to know that I was getting divorced. I remember, like, when we had to sell the house, telling the real estate agent, I don't want a sign in front of the house.
Okay, hold on. You're crying every day, calling, talking to your mom on the telephone.
Yep.
And it still took
5 years.
A third party,
Yeah,
okay, because your mom isn't a part of the marriage,
right.
to say to you, it's okay to leave. And then still with the emotions that you felt that were contradicting, that you were grappling with. How did you internally, like, was it her, yes, it's okay, that let you off the hook, or was it something else inside of you that says there's better?
I honestly believe it was her letting me off the hook. I think it was her saying, you know what you're about to get into. It's not going to be easy, but I guess I had enough respect for my mom because she had been through it. She'd been through it twice, you know, that, okay, it's time to go. It's interesting that you bring that up. I have no idea why that was what said, yes, it's time to go, but that is what it took for her to say, okay, I think it's bad enough that you shouldn't be putting up with it anymore.
10 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then what was your next move? Did you think, how would I tell my children, or?
So it actually, there was a threat of physical violence. There was not actually a physical violence, but I felt so fearful that I was sleeping on the couch at nighttime with a knife in my hand. So when you are sleeping in that kind of environment, you're not feeling real good. So when it got to, it was that way a couple of days, and he had threatened with a couple other things, and I finally, it was in June, a couple days before school was out, and I finally picked my kids up and I went to a relative's house and stayed with her. And he was calling, like, where are you? Why haven't you come home? And I said, I'm not coming home, the marriage is over. So Yeah, I had spoken to an attorney. I had gotten some advice ahead of time just so I kind of knew the steps to take. And the attorney, and the plan for the summer, even before I knew I was leaving, was the kids would go to their grandparents for the summer. So I had to get an order that it was okay to send them there so that it didn't look like I had abandoned my kids. So I had to talk to him a little bit to get that in place, and then I moved out of the house.
Safety plan first,
Yeah.
then you moved.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow, sleeping on the sofa with a knife in your hand.
Because I was afraid of what he might do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And there are a lot of people that do that very same thing
I'm sure.
every night right now.
Yeah, I'm sure there are, and it's a very, very scary place to be. And I didn't want to leave because of my kids. I didn't want to leave because I'd made this commitment. It's supposed to last forever, but it doesn't always last forever, and it's not necessarily a good thing to always be there, you know?
How did you, or did you, fight the urge? Because you didn't continue, like some women go back, and they try again, then they leave, and they try again, and they leave. How did you resist that urge?
I think I was done. I think waiting that 5 years, I was done. So it was, part of it's courage. You know, it wasn't just having my mom say it's okay, but it's the courage to say, okay, I've got a big responsibility now. You know, it's no longer going to be a 2-income household. It's going to be a 1-income household. How am I going to minimize it being the same way it was for me, for my kids? You know, how do I make all that better? Because you don't want your kids to go through what you went through. But they did. They did.
So since you didn't fight that, and you actually left at the point that you were absolutely done, did any of his family or relatives call you to try and bring the two of you back together?
Not really. I think his mom knew that it wasn't a good thing. I really do. I love his parents. His parents adore me. I still go see them every quarter, basically.
Wow.
So they were and are wonderful, wonderful people. Always took the kids for long periods of time, not just a weekend or something like that. Good grandparents.
So let's get into the 3 tips.
Okay.
And how someone should brace themselves for divorce before they actually make a step. Like you mentioned, you had spoken to a lawyer. What are some of the things that they're going to go through not expecting?
So I'm going to talk about children, since we've kind of talked a little bit about children, and this might take us the whole rest of your time. I don't know, but I have this.
Okay, well, no, wait a minute. This is a good place to take a break. We'll be right back after this.
Here's what you miss when you're not in studio with That Anita Live.
But back then, you said you was English. She said, oh, this said, bring me a third chair.
Last stop on the bus to the first stop on the bus, right? And then you get on the 7 train, last stop on the 7 train to the first stop on the 7 train, 42nd Street, then you transfer into the 1.
You want it?
Yes. But then I make it up there.
Okay, 1 second. How hard is it to deliver food? Please tell a man to just leave the food at the front there.
Because I'm at the end of my toilet paper roll, and so I can talk to multi-generations, I can.
I think it was when I talked to his wife.
Wow.
Yes. I don't even mention this in the book.
No, you didn't. Please spill the tea.
You know.
You did that.
Come on. I love to have you in my audience. And we're back with Debbie giving us juicy details of her experience, 1, growing up as a product of divorce, but then 2, having 2 divorces herself. You gave us some information on marriage number 1. So after that one, you weren't tainted because you tried it again.
I did. I thought the man of my dreams walked into the door and whooshed me off my feet, swept me off my feet. That's the word I want. And I thought he was the perfect man. He had all the values that my first husband didn't have. He was all about the family, everything. He had a nice job. And he wanted someone to stay at home. Not that I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. I really didn't want to, but we did. Well, he happened to, I must attract the physical attributes as well. And he got physical with my youngest son. And that kind of ended the marriage, not because of me thinking it was over, but because my son turned him into the police as a result of that. And he didn't think he could stay with me based on what my son had done. So what's interesting is I ended my first marriage, and it was, even though it took a long time for me to end the first marriage, it was easier. When he left me for the second marriage, it took a long time to recover. So what I've learned from that is when you're done, and it's easier to move on. But if your partner isn't done, or if your partner walks out on you, it's a lot harder to recover from that. And I don't think people recognize that as much in the relationships a lot of times. So the second one lasted 8 years, didn't last very long either, but
Day to day, that is a very long time.
yeah. But what's interesting is those were the most formative years for my kids. So my kids were 7 to 15-ish when the second one was in the picture, and when the marriage ended, he wanted absolutely nothing to do with them. So now these kids have a supposedly dad who no longer wants anything to do with them. And that's a whole other episode for you at some point, is dealing with step-parenting and what you should and shouldn't do with step-parenting with respects to the kids. So that's the end of the second marriage.
Wow, you've been through a lot.
I have. I've learned a lot. That's why I feel so strongly about this whole divorce topic. So
Divorce exposed.
He's divorce exposed.
So
That's
let's
right.
get into the 3 tips.
Okay. One of them, again, around children. And my philosophy on this is when you get married and you have children, the children didn't ask to come into the world. You made the decision to bring them into the world. So if you choose to end the marriage, you need to make them a priority. And through that, it's not, one of the things I think people should give some consideration to, and this is really hard, but it's putting the kids first, is that why do they have to go back and forth from parent to parent? Why can't they stay put and the parents go back and forth? That's one of my thoughts as to, this is why we have a lot of messed up kids today, I think, because divorce is so prevalent and the kids have to go back and forth. Their lives are disrupted. So that's something I wish people would start to think about. But the tip around children is, as soon as you think things are falling apart in your marriage, get your kids into therapy. And I don't think enough parents do that. The spouses do, but they don't put the kids in therapy. And to that same point, if things are falling apart when they're in high school, figure out a way to make it work through high school. Whatever you do, don't get divorced while they're in high school, because that's the most formative years for them, and that's when they take the chance of going down the wrong path where you really don't want them to.
And stability is the most important
Yeah.
at that time.
Yeah.
So do all 9 of you share holidays together?
The ones that I like, we do.
Good, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm going up there for 10 days. My sister who lives in Boston, I'm going up there for 10 days over the holidays. Now she's getting married for the 3rd time in October. I'm like, oh, this is
it just
tough.
keeps dropping out.
That's going to be interesting, but that's a whole other conversation.
Okay, tip number 2.
Tip number 2, and this almost goes back to while you're married or before you get married, but think of it as a business and have some contracts in place. And I know this is really, really difficult for people because like we talked about in the beginning, it's like you're getting married, it's going to last forever, it's never going to end. But the reality of it is more than 60% of marriages aren't making it. And the lawyers are the ones who really win in this scenario. And I have nothing negative to say about lawyers. I think we all need lawyers because it's contracts. But if you can put in writing, if this doesn't work out, how do we want to divide things? And you talk about these things when you're happy, when you're in love, not when you're fighting and you got the claws out.
And you can think rationally and be fair.
Yeah. I think that contracts are good. To give you an example, there's a lot of people who stay at home today. There's a lot of dual income families, but there are still a lot of moms, some dads, but moms who stay at home. Well, now you have the disparaging income. And if the relationship doesn't work out, if you've talked about how you would divide up the salaries when the relationship is good, if it doesn't work out, you can keep yourself out of court. Instead, that parent who stayed home, who didn't have the income, really has a tough time getting back to where that person might be. And if all of that was in a contract, it would just be so much easier to resolve. So that's my second tip is put things into contracts.
You tend to want more when you've got the dukes up and the divorce is hot versus when you're straight off the honeymoon and still liking the person, much less loving them.
Yeah. In my day job, I run business groups. I have a lot of 30-somethings in my groups, and it's totally business, but several of them have gotten married recently. I'm like, do you have a prenup? And they're like, no, I wouldn't have a prenup. She'd never marry me if I had a prenup. I'm like, or they'll say, we don't have any assets. We don't need to do that. I'm like, forget about what you have or don't have. Talk about how you would divide what you accumulate. And maybe we need to adjust it in 5 years. Maybe we need to adjust it in 10 years. But when you're able to talk about those things rationally, it makes the end so much easier.
Yeah, because all the tabloids are reporting that Prince Harry is not doing a prenup.
Really?
And it really has a lot of hot conversation in my office.
I'm sure. Yeah.
That
I mean, it's
for and against.
Yes, I mean, she's a beautiful woman, and they seem to have hit it off really well. But not everything lasts, and maybe the I don't know. The queen already decides what happens afterwards. I don't know,
so.
But maybe that's why they don't have one. But
I think so.
You know, people have a difficult time with a prenup. It's almost like, well, that means the marriage is going to end. And no, it doesn't mean the marriage is going to end. It may mean that it keeps the marriage stronger. It may mean that you try harder because you know what it's going to be like in the end. You know.
Okay, let's move into
the third
last
tip.
one. Number 3.
Be financially responsible. And that ties in the marriage and at the time of divorce. So in the marriage, it's oftentimes one parent or one party manages the funds and the other one has no clue what's going on. There needs to be some conversation about where the money is and how money is being spent and how it's being earned so that one person isn't left in the dark with all this stuff, because that just creates problems. And usually it's the man who earns the money and it's the woman who doesn't know anything about the money, and then she goes to get divorced and she doesn't know how to manage the money, and it's chaotic. So learn to be fiscally responsible, and as a couple, pay attention to where all the funds are and have conversations about that. But when it comes to divorce, the financial piece of it is sometimes going to court will cost you more money than what you're going to get as a result of going to court. And look at it that way. Again, the clause come out, I want everything. Well, the court isn't necessarily going to give you everything. Right. And you can spend $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 in legal fees to maybe get $50,000. It doesn't make financial sense. But the emotion takes over from the financial. And so if you pay more attention to the financial, it can have a bigger impact on what your net result will be in the long run. So pay attention to the money.
Pay attention to the money.
Pay attention to the money.
Put the kids first.
Put the kids first.
Number 2 was?
Have contracts.
And number 3?
Be financially responsible.
Great tips.
Good.
Have any of your siblings used any of those tips? Because you said the sister that you're going to see for in Boston.
The one who's about to get married.
And she's getting married for the
3rd time. No. You know, we had this agreement. If she watches this, she's going to kill me for saying this. We had this agreement that before we got married the next time, we each had to give the other person approval. Because sometimes we're so involved that we don't see the things that the other person says.
Misses those red flags.
Yeah, well, she's gay. She met this woman, she fell head over heels with her, and she's lovely. I love this woman, I really, really do. But my sister got it in her that she was going to do a video for the engagement. And she invested a lot of money in this video. She's a little spontaneous. And it's a beautiful video, and it was a total surprise. I mean, they filled up a movie theater and invited this person to see the video where she proposed in the video. And my sister said, oh, by the way, I'm doing this, and now I'm engaged. And I was in the theater at the time, but the video was all done. I'm like, wait a minute, we didn't talk about this, you know? And now it's a 250-person wedding. And I'm like, wow, that's a lot of people for a 3rd wedding. And I'm like, did you guys not talk about this ahead of time? And she's like, no, I just got engaged. And the other side of this, burying 9 parents.
That's what I was going to talk about. I was a third wife. Now this thing blew me away. I was a third wife. I thought I was the last wife. The mother of the groom died. All 3 wives were there. The husband and all of his friends stayed upstairs. The wives and various people were downstairs. And I was being so gracious. And my in-laws were saying, how could you be so gracious? And I said, well, I'm the last one. He's on 4.
Oh.
Yes. I stayed 20 years.
All the women got along. Like when my stepdad died, I don't know. All the women got along basically. So that was to my mom's credit. I commend her with that. Like I said, I wished I could have done that, but that didn't work out in my life.
I have a question. I was going to ask the question. You mentioned that priority is the children. I am one of 4, and I don't get along with my siblings either. And it's a battle. It's a different thing. But when you stay, because of the children, and you don't discuss that with the children, that makes that child say, okay, well, he or she didn't talk about, this or that with me, and I got to grow up in this house, and I got to hear them argue and fight, watch them fight. But when you don't talk to your children about what's going on, they see that. I mean, you set that environment. So when I remember times when I would come home from school, and I could get walking up the steps to the porch. I haven't even gotten in the house yet, even taken out my key, and I could hear them.
To your point, I don't think a lot of families, I don't think a lot of people know how to talk about this, because there's the guilt, there's the shame that this isn't working out.
Well, the thing that was different with us, we saw it. We knew what it was.
But the parents didn't know what to do.
Right, but
because hold on. Because
one, there's the financial impact. She might not be able to. And 2,
3 kids?
4, 2 boys, 2 girls.
Yeah, it's
1 was the financial, 2.
2, I think it's the emotional. There's emotional with how am I going to do this, and there's the emotional with marriages are supposed to last forever.
And then number 3, hold on.
I don't know yet.
Fear.
Fear. Yeah.
Because I know a lot of people.
My mother.
A lot of people who are so scared of the unknown. They could win the $10 million lottery and still not have the confidence and the courage to leave that type of relationship.
Ugly is worse than leaving.
The unknown.
Sometimes the embattlement, the energy you experience, because it's how do I fill the hole?
So.
Wow. Wow. I'm going to have Debbie back so that we can talk about everything else around divorce. There's a whole lot within her that we can all learn from. Divorce takes a serious toll on the entire circle, not just the couple. Consider how you will interact with in-laws, church members, people that knew you as a couple, like Debbie said. After a divorce, also remember what's most important is self-care is key to emotional healing and being on that emotional journey. To reach out to Debbie, visit divorceexposed.com. I'm Anita, your host. Be sure to check out thatanitalive.com for where and when to see our next episode.